sent to the Middle East in the Gulf War. Some interesting experience that he had. He competed in the German marksman course using weapons that he had never fired before. He drove through Kuwait City and the Highway of Death. He stopped to eat in Kuwait at a big tent with tables and a kitchen. He had a hot meal. He had no idea what it was he ate, but he said it tasted pretty good. Dan Hamlet in the Marines and the U.S. Army. He served 4 years in the Marines in the 1990s. Went to OCS. He was a helicopter mechanic, an MP, and an ROTC instructor at Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri. Dale Hurwitz served in Vietnam and emphasized the importance of helicopters. They brought the supplies in, they ferried soldiers out. And his experience was influential on him choosing his career as a teacher and an administrator. Glenn Miller. He was, from his perspective, provided many firsts. He had his first jet ride, first monsoon season, first time living with monkeys and poisonous snakes, and the first time being shot at. Served in Vietnam, he suffers from Agent Orange exposure as well. Bob Huemler. He was in the U.S. Navy, 61 to 65, attended OCS, served on the USS Coral Sea, served in recruit training, and one thing that impressed him was the shellback ceremony when he crossed the equator. Also experienced a typhoon. Neil Iverson. He was involved in Army security, had a top secret cryptographic security clearance. He was assigned to intercept NVA, North Vietnamese Army, and Viet Cong Morse code messages and give them to the deciphers so they could translate them into English. Marlon Johnson was a medic in the Air Force, stationed in a number of different locations. The role of the medic was very important in providing care for both emergency and non-emergency and critical cases. Cared for Vietnam patients at the Clark Air Force Base and was encouraged by the number of critical care recoveries that he witnessed. Doug Kaler. He trained as an electrician and a firefighter. When I visited with him, he said he was a little bored doing that, so he decided to volunteer to be a door gunner on a Huey helicopter in the Vietnam War. I'm sure he wasn't bored doing that. They had captured a North Vietnamese Army sergeant. They were taking him back, and the helicopter was hit. Kaler was hit in the leg, I believe. He ended up having to have surgery, and he was a recipient of a perk card. Larry Kuiman. Larry lives in California. He served in Cambodia and Vietnam. What sticks in his mind, I just talked to him yesterday, is the rain and the stink he smelled upon arriving in Vietnam. When he was discharged, he actually threw his uniform away and put on civilian clothes, and he said that at this point he still regrets doing that. His faith was especially important to him during his time in Vietnam. Harvey Lobbs, trained as a Chinese linguist. He attended Yale University, spending 8 months at their Institute of Far Eastern Languages. He served during the Cold War, it was 1960 to 64, and that he and his fellow servicemen performed a valuable mission that was quietly appreciated by the public. William Lefebvre. He served in Germany, 30 kilometers, about 20 miles from the Czech border when the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia. What was interesting to him was getting to know all the people he was stationed with. Doug Landsteiner. He served on the USS Cavalia, fast attack nuclear sub. He experienced 3 near-tragic incidents that could have potentially resulted in the loss of the crew and the ship. Landsteiner said, and I'll quote him on that, "I feel very honored to have served our country for 20 years in the U.S. Navy. I feel even more honored to have served the veterans of this county over the past 20 years as a Martin County Veterans Service Officer." And I would say I'm honored to have worked with Doug. He's an excellent Veterans Service Officer. Glenn Landsteiner, Air Force, 1972 to 94. Some of his significant experiences: he was the NCO in charge of Abrams Tank Maintenance Evaluation, recipient of the Chief of Staff of the Army Maintenance Excellence Award, and named Inspector General of the G4 Maintenance Advisor to the Assistant Division Commander. Mel Langford served in Vietnam, trained in map reading, plotting targets, radar. He flew in an OB-1 Mohawk, operating the infrared radar systems at night. He said that on one occasion, while on a mission, Langford was almost hit by an enemy missile. He said, "To tell you how close that round came to me, if I had opened the hatch of the plane and reached out, I could have easily touched it." Neil Lee, U.S. Army, Iowa National Guard, and the Minnesota National Guard. He was commissioned as second lieutenant at South Dakota State University. Piloted a CH-47 Chinook in Vietnam. His job was to resupply ammo, food, water, and whatever else was needed. 8-hour flight days were not uncommon. Richard Madej served in Vietnam in engineering. They built base camps and pads for helicopters. He was in the field all the time and lived under culverts covered with sandbags for protection. David Manning, U.S. Air Force, attended Mace Missile Maintenance Tech School at Lowry Air Force Base in Colorado. In 1982, he was named superintendent of the 868th Tactical Training Squadron, the school that trained ground-launched cruise missile personnel for deployment to Europe. Dale Martins served primarily in administration, yeoman, clerk, typist, tech instructor. I had a chance meeting with a high school classmate in North Africa. He was there for 21 months. And he was also a teacher in Fairmont for 27 years. Leo Mao, Tremont native, served in World War II. Attended OCS. In November of 1944, the 7th Army was advancing into Alsace, France. Mao's company was greatly outmanned. They defended the area against the German tanks and infantry, causing the Germans to retreat. As a result of that, he was given a presidential citation stating the 7th Army wouldn't be where it is today had it not been for your magnificent courage. Brenda McEwing, U.S. Army. She's a 1983 graduate of Sherburne High School. She said, "The military changed my life." When she served in Korea, she was the only female in her platoon. Today she travels around the U.S. In a Native American Women's Color Guard, and she founded the First Nations Women Warriors in 2014 to build houses for homeless Native and other veterans. Aaron Meyer, U.S. Army, 1999 to 2021. Kind of a unique career. He worked in the military police. He was a military dog handler and a kennel master. He taught dogs how to search for IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan, conducted searches in support of the Secret Service and the President of the United States, searched for drugs on installations, and he said training the working dogs and handlers has been the most interesting aspect of my time. Gary Myers served as a traffic control ramp coordinator. He monitored over 120 aircraft error-free examples and was awarded 2 Bronze Pride Awards within 6 months for his accuracy in what he was called to do. Jim Miller, stationed in Germany, he was involved with humanitarian work with the local German people, including food distribution to orphanages. He stated he witnessed the impacts of World War II in meeting a Holocaust survivor from a concentration camp. Another interesting thing is he also assisted a German soldier who was a POW in the U.S. during World War II, who had a check dated 1944, found to be valid and paid 20 years later. Miller feels that the military was important in character building, discipline, and meeting people. Sarah Morales, Minnesota Army National Guard. Her primary work was involving the 2011 flood in Minot, North Dakota. Provided flood relief services, sandbagging, traffic guidance, and so on. Even as National Guard member, she encountered a dangerous situation when an individual pulled a knife on her because she wouldn't allow him to enter the evacuated neighborhood. Don Nazelrode. Mission in Vietnam was to provide radio communication throughout much of the Central Highlands by setting up sites on top of mountains and hills. Happiest day of his life was when the plane lifted off to go to Vietnam. To leave Vietnam. The saddest day is when he returned and they were sent to a designated area in the terminal to avoid protesters targeting them with eggs and other forms of harassment. Russell Nelson, assigned to the USS Blue Ridge. He was a yeoman, served off the coast of Vietnam for 63 consecutive days. Bob Neusch, helicopter mechanic. He wanted to be a pilot, but he would have had to extend it, so he decided to be a mechanic. Served in Vietnam, was a crew leader. He experienced the Tet Offensive, and he accompanied test flights after he had worked on the planes. He's appreciative of having the Bell Cobra fixed-wing attack helicopter on display at the Martin County Veterans Memorial Center. Ernie Nuss, Army, 1964 to 66. He was number 1 on the draft list in Beamer County, Iowa, so he knew he was going for sure. He spent 4 months in radio repair school. His military occupational skill was radio repairman. Nuss feels very strongly about the benefits of serving in the military. He believes that all Americans should serve their country. Benjamin Gary Lee Olson. He was a nuclear machinist mate. He operated and maintained naval nuclear propulsion plants for propulsion and power generation on board. Served in Operation Key Resolve and Westpac deployment that brought them off the coast of the Korean Peninsula during tensions with North Korea. While in school, he volunteered for the Captain's Care organization that provided free summer meals for children while he was in school in New York. David Peterson, U.S. Marines, traveled around the world. He was impressed by the discipline of military life and the opportunity to meet the many people he had the chance to meet. Michael Post. He was drafted a week after graduating from college. He was in Vietnam. Something significant, in my opinion, that he said, and I noticed that myself as well when I was in. Being a little older at age 22, he noted that most of the guys were 18 and 19-year-old kids who seemingly aged 10 years in 1 year being in Vietnam. James Richards, U.S. Air Force. He was an F-100 fighter pilot in Vietnam. He flew 175 missions. He was shot down by ground fire over Laos in 1970 and was rescued by a helicopter. He was awarded 2 Flying Crosses and a Purple Heart. Sherwood Sagado, main duties involved processing new recruits. He was a squad leader marching up what was called Agony Hill in the Rocky Mountains. Encountered a blizzard. They had to recount all their members. Finally, they were all accounted for and everyone was safe. He became a counselor and coach at Fairmont High School for over 30 years. Michael Sandersfeld, he was a supply clerk. He was in Vietnam. He said what stands out to him is the discipline by military training and sacrifices, how tough and how rigorous the boot camp part of the Marine Corps was for him. Myrna Schaefer, Minnesota National Guard and U.S. Army. She enjoyed basic training, thought the food was good. Something significant as far as her tour of duty, well, she was also in the recruiter's office in Fairmont for a time, but she was the administrative assistant to the Army personnel planning team that set goals for the all-volunteer Army. Gary Schaub served in Vietnam. He said there was a significant difference between training and actual combat. He made 32 combat assaults, most done in a helicopter, earned a number of medals, including 2 Bronze Stars. Ryan Schofield, Air National Guard and U.S. Air Force. He served with his son for over 16 years while he was in the military. Considered time spent in the Air Force unique and rewarding. Lawrence Ziegler, U.S. Navy, 52 to 56. He remembers the long hours on watch and the strong storms at sea. He said upon being discharged, he found the public to be very welcoming and grateful for his service and enjoyed his time in the Navy. Carl Smith enlisted at the end of World War II at age 17. His job was to stand behind the Army engines with a fire extinguisher in the event that they burst into flame. Robert Swanson, he oversaw rocket launchers. He once hitchhiked from Virginia to East Chain on leave. Consider the Navy a great and rewarding experience. Arnie Swenson, his duties were primarily guard duty and sentry guard duty. He would go with, in the event anyone was killed, he would go with the officer in charge and was called to type up all necessary paperwork. Art Tallage was in the motor pool. He volunteered for the draft. He worked as a truck driver transporting fuel and supplies. While in Korea, he would also travel with a Korean interpreter. Warren Tesdall, U.S. Marines, 1965 to 68, served in Vietnam. Most of his missions were done at night, mandated not to carry any ID in case they were captured. He was once injured by shrapnel in his helicopter. He immediately started to help the injured Korean soldier, not knowing that he himself was seriously injured until one of his people on board said, "The chief is injured." Steve Tom served aboard the Essex. On a helicopter, he photographed the USS Nautilus, and it's one of the only color pictures of that submarine. Sean Totsky worked in maintenance, served in Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, considered the opportunity to live and spend time in other countries to be a positive experience. Serena Totsky Johnson was an LPN. She said, "I'm proud to have served and have so much respect for all service members." Michael Tao, served for over 31 years. He assisted the Iraqi government to set up courts, jails, and prisons. Lenny Tweeden, that would be me. I was in the Coast Guard 1968 to 72. I was extremely fortunate, had very good duty. I was on an icebreaker for about 3 months. Served the balance of my time in the federal building. Had some unique experiences. Had a car stolen. Was in a bank that was being robbed. And other than that, met a lot of really nice people and had a very good experience. Jared Wadle, U.S. Navy, 2008 to 18, commissioned through the Naval Reserve, Lieutenant Commander, over 13 years of service in the U.S. Navy, has over 1,000 hours of military flight instruction, and considers instructor pilot and landing signals officer as very important duties. Brother Justin Wadle is in the Navy, pilot, weapons officer, volunteered for the Global War of Terrorism Support assignment, became a civilian instructor following his active duty. Tommy Westcott served in Vietnam and Korea. He worked with sheet metal on planes and recovery crews. He also served as a project manager for restoration and installation of the Cobra attack helicopter at the Martin County Veterans Memorial Site. Mick Whitrock, duties are primarily clerical. He worked in the State Department, served 2 Desert Storm Shield deployments, and assisted in the evacuation of service families from the Philippines when Mount Pinatubo erupted. Kenny Walter, served in Vietnam. Duties were to repair helicopters, lived in tents surrounded by sandbags, incurred many mortar attacks. Mike Walter, U.S. Marines, 1968 to 70, 66 to 70. He was a helicopter pilot. He saved another pilot who was shot down by picking him up in his helicopter. Walter received a letter of commendation from the Air Force stating that the rescued pilot, that the Apollo astronauts never received better service. Charles Woody Woodward, U.S. Navy, 68 to 71, served his entire enlistment on the Kitty Hawk, including 22 months in the combat zone off Vietnam. He served as a ship's serviceman who worked in the laundry, the electronic shop, ran a ship store, and a phone talker for repair parties that pumped phone to the flight decks. Marlon Ruckey served in Vietnam in the Personnel Actions Division. At Fort Snelling, he dealt with broken enlistment promises, helped wives and dependents for lack of support. He also had a negative experience with people throwing eggs and tomatoes at us, he's saying, and calling us baby killers when he returned from Vietnam. Richard Zeems, U.S. Marines, 66 to 71. He served as a helicopter pilot for 13 months. He considered night medevacs to rescued soldiers as the most dangerous because they had no defense weapons. One example, he flew 19 medevac missions under heavy fire. He served as a super stand, that's Top Gun instructor. And for all Martin County veterans, we thank you for your service.
Now would you join me in remaining quiet as we reserve a moment of silence for those veterans lost and no longer with us. Our local American Legion members will now retire our colors. Please stand. All right, you may be seated. I would like to take this time to conclude the program by again thanking our veterans and your attendance today, and for those of you watching online, we thank you for your service. We cannot thank you enough for your service for our country. At this time, our veterans, we will dismiss you into our commons. We've got a little reception up there with some goodies made by our culinary arts students. So hopefully you enjoy. Students, if you would please remain seated until our veterans have exited, and at that time I will dismiss you by grade. Thank you. So as they exit, really quick, students, a moment. The bell will be ringing in about 2 to 3 minutes. On your way out, they're going to be in the commons enjoying some of those refreshments and things. But if you would please, on your way out, if you have the time, and hopefully you can make the time, please stop over and thank the veterans for their service. Some of you noticed some familiar names on the list that were shared today. Some of you may even be related to the members that were shared. And we know there are countless others from even our area that have served in a variety of wars and conflicts. So please do what you can to thank a veteran. If you go home tonight and you know a veteran or you know someone who has served, please thank them for their service. So seniors, if you would, you will be dismissed right now. All right, 7th and 8th graders, you've done a wonderful job. Head on down. Sophomores and juniors, thank you. Thank you, guys. And then 9th graders, when our sophomores and juniors head out, you may go as well.